As Father John said in his introduction, my name is Father Kurt Parera, and I'm the Vocation Director for the Diocese of Phoenix and a formator at the Nazareth House Seminary. You know, as I was looking at the gospel today, I thought about, have you ever heard of the game Bigger and Better? Bigger and Better. So in this game, right, kids start off with something of little value, like a dime, and then they head into their neighborhood to see what they can trade it up for. So they knock on people's doors, ask if they'd be willing to trade something for the dime, and then they go to the next door with whatever they just traded. And the goal of the game is to come back with something bigger and better than what you started out with. So the bigger it is, the better. So Bob Goff, author and attorney, described his son Richard's experience playing this game in his neighborhood with his friends. So Richard sets out with a dime and knocks on the front door of his neighbor and says, "Hi, we're playing Bigger and Better, and I'm hoping to trade up for something bigger. Do you have anything that you could trade me?" So the guy at the door had never heard of this game before, and nevertheless he calls back to his wife and says, "Hey, Marge, there's a kid here and we're playing Bigger and Better. What do we have that's bigger and better than a dime?" Richard walks away with a ping pong table. So by the end of the night, when he came home, Richard didn't have a dime, he didn't have a ping pong table, an elk head, or the 5 other things that he had traded up for. He came back home with no joke, a pickup truck. No lie, he started off with a dime and he ended up with a Dodge pickup. Now, teens with newly obtained driver's license out there looking for a car, PSA, be aware, results may vary from player to player. You see, this game reminds me of today's passage in the gospel because there's definitely some trading up going on. Jesus tells his disciples a parable about a man who called in all his servants and entrusted to them his possessions. And I know that most of the parable focuses on the one who just buried his talent where it was given, but I want us to reflect a little bit more about the ones who did end up multiplying what was entrusted to them to something bigger and better. You know, what did those servants have that the one who only had 1 talent didn't? You see, the nameless servants who were good and faithful had a spirit of trust in them. They generously took in what they were given, and they gave everything without holding back. They were willing to risk everything for the benefit of obtaining something much more. You see, the servant who was not successful, he didn't even want to risk what little he had. He wanted to keep it and not do anything with what he had been given. And so Jesus isn't revealing some sort of investment strategy here, but rather what he's showing us is what sort of disposition we should have with God, and how to act with all the gifts, talents, abilities, possessions that we are entrusted with. Look, after all, notice that the talents that were given, they didn't even belong to the servants. Whose talents were they? The master, right? So it wasn't even them. The master had given them these talents in order to invest them for him. So the master wanted an accounting of everything that he had given the servants and what they did with it. And I think sometimes if we look at our relationship with God, we fail to realize, first of all that we've been given. All of our talents, all of our gifts, all of our treasures. And then even what little we have, sometimes don't we want to be a little bit selfish? Like, oh no, this is my time, Lord. Like, you know, I don't want to pray, or really, do I have to go to mass? Like, I don't know, I want to keep it all to myself. So rather than spreading it and sharing it with others, we want to keep it to ourselves. Because there's always this little voice in our mind, in our relationship with God and others, that we fall into the trap of either giving God the minimum, meaning that we sometimes give God over the leftovers, or we just give what we want to give to God. And that's the lesson we can learn from the good and faithful servants. They didn't just keep the talents they received to themselves or invest it partially, but they invested everything. They held nothing back, and they wanted all in. So what about us? Are we willing to double up but in the process seem to risk everything that we have or own? Is there a part of my life where I want to keep back something for myself rather than invest my all? As I said before, in my daily prayer or Sunday Mass, do I give God my everything or whatever is left? Do I go praying daily or going to adoration only if I have time, or only if I don't have work, or when I'm sleepy, or only right before bed do I say my prayers, or just after I watch one more episode on Netflix, right? So we sometimes say to God, yeah, God, you can have my time, my talents, my possessions and treasures, but only what is left over. So I want to propose something. Young ladies out there, imagine you're on a date at a restaurant, and your date says, don't worry, I got this, and only ordered one meal. Then he says, it's okay, let me eat first, and then you can have whatever is left over on my plate. Will your reaction be like, oh man, he's such a keeper? No, you would dump his butt right away, right? And you should. That's not a man who gives everything, right? But isn't that what we do with God? More often than we care to admit it, right? Only God gets what is our leftovers, or we take our talents and treasures and say, okay, what is this going to earn me? What is it going to cost me? And what is the benefit going to be for me? And I don't think it's a coincidence that the word used in today's gospel is talent. Even though sometimes we may feel like, you know what, Father, I don't really have talents. I don't really have anything I can offer to the church. I can't really do this. In the end, it's good to ask that even what little we have, if you have a pulse, right? All of you, I'm guessing, have a pulse right now. If not, somebody please call 911. Then you can serve, you can give something. Are we willing to risk it all? Are we willing to go out and trade it for something that is better? To put all our talents and our gifts at the service of what God desires? Spanish TikTok famous influencer Naim Derechi dared to tell his 26 million followers his thoughts when asked his opinion about abortion. He simply said, an abortion is interrupting life. When a woman is pregnant, if she doesn't abort, the natural cycle is going to make a life emerge. And to those who are in favor of abortion because they say that the fetus does not suffer, it's not the question of whether it suffers or not. The question is that a life is being taken away, a life that society has disregarded. This TikTok famous influencer is 19 years old, from Spain, and he's one of the most influential Spanish young people on TikTok. And he is able to charge up to $25,000 per endorsement on his page, as well as being a musician and an author. He is aware that expressing such views could cost him and shower him with criticism, or even to get canceled in today's society. But when asked if his girlfriend were to become pregnant, what would he do? He replied, I would be a dad without hesitation. You give me a child and I'll fall in love with it. Imagine that. Naim is not an evangelizer or a saint, as you can see by his other posts. But for a moment there, he risked his security to proclaim and follow the truth. He handed more than a dime. He handed his possible reputation, endorsements, popularity to get something bigger and better, as over 7 million people heard him speak the truth on his platform. And as for Richard and the Dodge pickup, the next day with his parents, he donated it to the church down the street so they could use it for a family who needed a vehicle for work. And like the good and faithful servants, perhaps even like a famous TikTok influencer, he traded everything, gave away his security, and allowed God to give him double and something much bigger and better than he could ever imagine.